Hello and welcome to the second tutorial for the Glyphs app for YSDN 3003 typeface design. In this video I'm going to show you how to set up your typeface design file essentially. And in particular I'm going to focus on setting up the file and setting up the metrics specifically in this video. Then we'll move on to a separate video where we'll talk about how do we set up the variable font side of the file and work with that, and what does a variable font file in terms of a working file look like. But in this video we're going to set up the metrics, and remember in class we'll have talked about sketching your typeface ideas. So this is a typical typeface concept sketch. Different type designers have different processes when they're working on a typeface design concept. Some will spend a lot of time sketching and go through a lot of sketches. Others will spend no time sketching on paper at all, and they'll just go directly to the computer and they'll start drawing with Bezier curves, with vector curves. It's really a matter of preference, I think. I don't think that you're going to have a better result if you start directly with the vector curves on the computer. I think that there's nothing wrong at all with sketching on paper. In fact, I think that really sketching on paper or starting with vectors, the two of them are not the direct point of departure. I think that the direct point of departure is after you've done your research and you understand what your typeface is about, what the purpose of your typeface is, where does it have to be used, what conditions will be placed on. I think then what you do is you have to create a visualization of what that concept is going to be. So is it going to be a serif typeface? Will it be a sans serif typeface? What does the atmosphere need to be? What will the modulation structure generally be? And sketching on paper or starting to, let's say, sketch and build your design with the vector curves in a program like Glyphs, you have to have a visualization of what you want to achieve generally once you start. Otherwise, you could start doodling on a piece of paper, let's say, and you might not know, or I guess I shouldn't use the word doodle necessarily, but you could start trying to make sketches on a piece of paper. However, if you don't know exactly what you would like to achieve during that sketching session, your time investment will be spent no differently than if you're on the computer working in Glyphs. So in my opinion, I think that it's not about sketching, it's not about working with vectors. You need to have a clear visualization of what you'd like to do. So I think that's the starting point. But for myself, I tend to make a quick rough sketch, and this would be a great example. Another example, and I might work with this font in later videos, or this concept, would be, let's say, this slab serif concept here. You'll notice that I'm not drawing all the letters in the alphabet because the letters in the alphabet, let's say the Latin script, and I will argue that any script is like this, contain a series of common patterns or stroke elements. If you look at this set of letter forms, you see round curved forms, you see straight stem forms, a slab serif form that's constant throughout. You see curves like on the top of this F. So I'll zoom in here real quick. Oh boy, what happened? Well, it looks like I crashed that. Let me quickly go open those up again. But I'm not going to stop for that. This is what we were looking at. We're going to actually work with this drawing today. So, to go quickly, in looking at this design, it's the same idea. In this design, the serif typeface, you have consistent serif parts that you see. Look at the bottom of the P, the N. Look at the hook curves, similar behaviors on the bottom of A, the spurs, on the T, same behavior. Same serif on the R, capital, as you see on the lowercase letters. The way that this P bowl behaves should be similar to the way that the bowls of the G and the R behave. The same thing with this N, you'll use the same elements of this N to more or less build the M, the H, the U. And even the lowercase r could be started from the N very easily. So what you should recognize about designing a typeface is that it's a series of patterns that you spread across the alphabet. Or if you're working on another script that's not even alphabetic, let's say you're working on Chinese, which is an ideographic script full of ideograms, you would still see common stroke patterns in that alphabet, in that system. So that's what we're looking at when we're working on a sketch, whether it's digital or on paper. And when I'm working on a sketch, what's key in any sketch that I'm working on is that I have the metrics set up. So you'll see the metrics, or what I should really say is the vertical metrics, which are the descender line, the baseline, the x height, the cap height, and the ascender height. These aspects are critical in any typeface design. You cannot, to quote Harald Unger, you're not going to make it very far with a typeface design sketch if you don't have a good grid, if you don't have any kind of a grid set up. So you need to have something that tells you this is the height of the lowercase letters generally. This is where my descenders will land, my ascenders. This is the relationship. Think about the cap height that you choose and your x height as a relationship to one another, not as isolate elements. The relationship, the relationship of x height to capital height will have a huge influence on the atmosphere of your typeface, especially in text settings, but even in larger text settings, like let's say pull quotes, in headline settings as well. That relationship will have a pretty significant role to play in how your typeface is perceived. You'll see in this sketch the cap height would be, perhaps it feels a little bit short to what we might expect intuitively. However, this is a deliberate choice so that the capitals will not stand out so much in a text pattern because they don't have to. And if I was designing a display, let's say a display axis in a variable font with this typeface that would have an optical axis, the display version might be where the caps sit at the same height, but the lowercase gets a little bit shorter. So that you increase that kind of relationship, you would get larger ascenders. Your descenders could potentially get a little bit longer as well. But they probably wouldn't change very much. Okay, so let's start setting up a file. So if we go over to Glyphs, I'm going to make a new file, Command-N or New under File. And just like in the first video that we did together, you'll see the workspace. This is, once again, our font map, font window. And what I'm going to do when I'm getting started on a typeface design is I'm first going to put in the sketch, because the sketch is going to be my basis for where the different grid lines sit, the vertical metrics. So it doesn't really matter where I start. I'll start with the lowercase n. I tend to draw the lowercase n or a first, one of these characters, because especially the n, lowercase, and by the way I double clicked in here, especially the n lowercase, it will give me many other characters like the m, h, u, potentially the r. All of these are related patterns. So it makes sense to start with something that you can build quite a few patterns with to see how is the chosen DNA of my typeface working. Okay, so in order to paste in a photo, what I do is I go to Glyph on the Glyphs menu and I go to Add Image. And what I need to do is I need to go find that image. So for us, at least in this video, it is in my teaching folders, and we're going to bring in this one. You select the image, you put it in here, you paste it in, and what you see is the image in this glyph. Now, this image, if I type out another glyph, and if I click on the M, this image is only in the N glyph. It's not in the M glyph. So let me get a couple of extra letters here. It's not inside the O. I can't edit it right now. I have to be inside the N glyph. So I'm going to get rid of these glyphs. Okay, now the first step is to set up your drawing so that it fits between the ascender and the descender. Now it's important to realize that in an application like Glyphs or any font editor, RoboFont, FontLab, FontForge, etc., the descender, so the descender mark, which is technically this mark, and the ascender mark, which is this mark here, these are technically the utmost top and utmost bottom of the glyph. So this is the top boundary, the bottom boundary. And what I want to do with my drawing is I've purposely put grid lines into my drawing so that I can line them up when I put the image in Glyphs, and then I can actually start entering the metric values and the font info when we get there. But so what we're going to do is I'm going to take, I see here that in my drawing I've said that the ascenders are actually going to be here, and I think I had established that after I had drawn this ascender line. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ignore this red line, or what I might say is that actually what I've done in this sketch is that this is the top boundary of the glyph, which is, let's say hypothetically, it's our ascender. That's the terminology right now. And this is the descender, which is the bottom boundary. But we'll actually think about our descenders landing somewhere inside here and somewhere here inside this glyph boundary. So this top red mark, this bottom red mark, I'm going to line them up with the top and the bottom of the glyph. So the way to do that is when I've clicked on my drawing, I go over to where you see this scaling function. So you'll see here, this is the actual title of your image. This is your image editing box. And what I can do is size it up. So it looks like I don't have to size it up very much, and I'm going to try 400. Okay, so I'm thinking, yeah, that's massive. Too big. It's probably something more like this range. No, still way too big. Let's try this. And what I want to do, I'm just generally getting it into this area, roughing it in. So what I'm going to do is, see, does 135 sit a little bit more comfortably in here? And I think actually, and what I'm really doing here, you'll notice that actually this grid line, this image is not perfectly straight. That's fine. This is just giving me an indication of where things should sit. What's actually probably better for me to look at is the drawing of the lowercase p here, which has an ascender. Notice how I've sort of drawn a lowercase b onto the p. These are related patterns, related pieces of DNA. They spread themselves consistently across certain shapes. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use this character to figure out, this is where I want the ascenders to sit, this is where I want the descenders to sit, and I'm thinking that actually I want to do something more like this. And I think that occupies the box better. Now I don't care right now about the baseline. So you see the baseline is here. Once I've lined it up, I'm going to put right now what the baseline is. I'm going to line that up, and I'm going to go into my metrics, and I'm going to set it up so that these glyph boundaries work with my drawing. So I'm going to right click and lock the image. So that's right click, control click, lock image. Now if I click on the drawing, it grays it in the background. Okay, now I'm going to go in here, and what I need to do is go to masters. Now I can call this font anything I want. Sure. I don't think you can actually do that. It won't export. Okay, now remember, we talked last time about we can add multiple masters to our file, which we will in the next video. We're not going to do that right now because we're just setting up the metrics. These metrics, or our vertical metrics, are defined here. And you'll notice what you see. You see, I'm going to just do this. You see the ascender mark, which is at 800 technically. 800, 700 for the cap height, X height at 500, and the descender at negative 200 are all relative to the position of 0, which is the baseline. This is technically 0. Okay, but remember last video, 200 and 800, the ascender value and the descender value must add up to 1,000, or if I go back to here, they have to add up to whatever your units per m measurement is. So if it was 2048, they would all have to add up to this value, but we only work in 1,000 units right now for a lot of settings, most settings. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say this is my baseline, okay, and I'm going to enter values so that my grid in my glyph drawing window equals what my drawing shows me. Now, one way to do this, and I'll introduce you to a new tool, is the measurement tool. You could just measure from the baseline to, let's say, right here, and then you could actually just get the value that you need for your X site. It's a fast way to do it. Your measurement tool, you can select it on the toolbar above, or a shortcut for that is to hold down Control, Option, Command all at the same time, and I can drag out a measurement line. This is really handy when I'm working on a lot of letter forms, when I want to get a quick access to it. So that's up to you if you want to use that, but you can just select the measurement tool. You can measure from where the baseline is right now, around 0. And by the way, if you hold Shift, you constrain your selection, and it looks like about 426. It's a pretty short X height. And I could change the relationship of the letter on the body of the glyph. Now the body, when I refer to something like body, what I actually mean is the entire top to bottom, and even the width of the glyph, but really the top to the bottom is a fixed boundary. So when I refer to the body of a typeface, what I mean is I'm on a 1,000 units per m glyph body. Okay, this is 0, let's say, hypothetically, and if I go with my measurement tool, sorry, if I measure from here with my measurement tool all the way to the top, I have, let me get there, there's 1,000. That's 1,000, that's the body. So if I measured from the baseline to the X height in my drawing, I see that it's about 426. That's a pretty small X height, I would say, just off the top of my head. And it's going to change. Now see, it's sitting down where my drawing suggests it. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger because I think that the N actually suggests. So I'm going to make it 430. And it's going to shift up. Now my R, let's say the R is around here. And if that's the case, then it's around 620. I'm going to go for 620. And then it's going to shift. Okay, and what I can also do is unlock the image by Control-click Unlock, or right-click if you're on a mouse. And I can bring the R in here, and I can say, actually, the R was shorter than that, based on my drawing. And I can go back into here and say, actually, what if we go, I really should have measured that. And let's measure this again. It's actually about 590. 597. Wow. Let's try 600. That's better. Okay, I'm going to bring the P back in and lock it. Okay, now what I need to do is I need to set where the top boundary and the bottom boundary are going to be. So don't think about these things as your ascender and descender. To set up the ascender and descender, what you're going to do is you're going to put a guideline there and make it a global guideline, and you will see what that is shortly. It will be present in every glyph. Okay, so now if I want to set this up, what I like to do with the ascender value and the descender value is I have the drawing open beside me, and I have my values here, and I try to basically set them up so that I feel like they're fitting comfortably. I could take a measurement, so I could say from here to, let's say here, that's about 730, and from here to here, that's about 260, and they would have to add up to 1,000. So 730, and what this would then therefore have to be is it would have to be 260 70. So essentially what you're doing is you always have to be working with 1,000 with those values. They have to add up to 1,000. 730, 270. Forget about the minus. That just refers to the fact it is descending below the baseline, which is 0 unit value. Okay, now that looks pretty comfortable. What it means is if I'm working in a typesetting application, let's say like there are some typesetting applications, the way that they might make use of the line layout engine in Mac OS or Windows or Linux, where leading might not be present for some reason. Let's say that there's no leading, or let's say that I set my leading to be basically 0, like no leading. What that means is that my typeface, when I stack type together, imagine if this is a physical block, they will literally be stacked together. Now if I set up my design like this, it means that I don't run the risk of my typeface ever crashing together if by default the glyph boundary, the leading disappears, and then the glyph boundary is the only thing that I have that's separating the lines of type. That's a situation that could happen. It's not likely, but it's something that you might design your typeface for in a digital environment because it could very well happen. So, in that case, I keep the ascenders and the descenders out of the way. Okay, now I talked about a global guideline. A global guideline, the way that I'll add a guideline in general is I will go Control click and I will go Add Guide. Now what you'll notice with Glyphs is that you get a blue guideline when you automatically add guide. Now this blue guideline is a native guideline to this glyph. Let's say it's the P. Right now it's technically the N. But right now this guideline, this blue one, will not exist in any other glyph in the font. So if I go over to the G in the font, if I was to type it out, so let's type out another letter, the G. And if I click on the G, actually what I'm going to do, in order to show you this, I'm just going to delete this image for a second. So notice how that guideline is not in the G right now. It only exists in this glyph. But if I click on the circle, which by the way is how I will select a guideline, I right click on it, I say make global guideline, it'll turn it red. And this guideline is now in every glyph. So if I go and click on the I, the M, this guideline lives in every single glyph, and if I move it, it will move the same way across every glyph. If I, say, do this, it will be the same in every glyph, but I don't want to do that. Okay, I'll reposition it after. Okay, and what I'm going to do is paste the image back. And it is at the same interval. Perfect. What I'm going to do is, oh, it's hard to see that little, you have to grab the little circle, and there it is. That's true, I should have locked the image, and I can see. What I'm going to do is I'm going to set it up where I want my ascender to be, and then I can copy, paste, so edit, copy, edit, paste, and I make a duplicate. By the way, in Glyphs or any font editor, when you copy and paste an item, it by default pastes it in place. So it pastes it over top of the existing item. So what I'm doing here is I'm setting up my descender and my sender. And if I was to once again delete the image, now I've got an ascender and a descender. Sorry, an ascender and a descender. I've got a baseline set up. I've got my X height, my cap height, and I'm ready to start actually drawing letters. Now why is this so critical? This is so critical because if I start drawing letters without these elements, I will be having, let's say, a lowercase g that sits way below the glyph boundary, or I'll have a P that sits too close to the baseline. What this allows me to do is just to know that when I have a descender, it should always sit here. When I have an ascender, it should always come up to here. My cap should be here. And for the most part, my X height, where my lowercase letters will be sitting at the X height, I know that they sit here. The other things that I need to set up are things like overshoots and undershoots, but I'll do that in the video when I start drawing letters. Okay, so I'm going to end this video now, and in the next video I will talk about setting up a variable font file on top of what I already have